Okay, we're going to take a look at the history of China. Humans have been living in China since at least 19,000 BCE, that's before Common Era. Farming of grains begins approximately 7,000 BCE with rice and soybeans at 5,000 BCE. Chinese history begins along the Yellow River, the cultural hearth for East Asia. Our early civilization, the earliest forms of writings date back to about 5,500 BCE. They're pictographic, and so you can see with these images to the right where you have these drawings and recordings of history conveying some sort of idea. They are later used in Chinese character symbols. Alright, early states of China. Yeah, the most early Chinese governments were dynasties. They're ruled by a select few or a royal family. You have the Xia, about 2100 to 1600 BCE, probably the oldest but poorly recorded or understood. You have the Shang dynasty from the 1600s to 1046 BCE, and they're known for keeping records on oracle bones. That could be in the form of bones from cattle or cows and the backs of turtles or turtle shells. They would record this information, and in the lower right hand corner we have an example of this. Okay, now you have the development of Chinese pictographs. In the right column you have the meanings. You have the words like sun, moon, mountain, water, rain, wood, rice, plant, and human, and each of these meanings has 6 different kinds of scripts. If you saw their ancient language recordings on oracle bones, you'd probably see these different symbols in the far left column that convey these ideas. So this is a big way. This is one of the main ways how Chinese culture or Asian cultures sometimes use, or how they use these pictures to convey an idea. Okay, here we have the development of Chinese pictograms. This is where, if you see in the right-hand column, you have these different meanings of words. You have sun, moon, mountain, water, rain, wood, rice, plant, and human. In the far left column, you'll see the ancient recordings that would go on oracle bones, and you would see this, this first example of the sun was just a circle with a dot in it, and then you'll see the evolution of these scripts over time to the right, which conveys the same idea. Now we have the Shang dynasty. They fought constant wars with nomads of the steppes to develop bronze as a metal. Chang Chao is the last emperor that faces rebellion. He commits suicide. He lost the mandate of heaven and fell out of favor with the gods and could be replaced by the gods. The mandate of heaven is an idea where a emperor's rule is validated or invalidated. For example, it was commonly understood that if an emperor's rule was unrighteous or unjust, there would be certain things that would happen, maybe perhaps famines and earthquakes, a number of natural disasters, and that would usually be a symbol that the emperor hasn't been ruling justly. And so people would think that he has lost the mandate of heaven, and it's definitely the case when they are overthrown. That's the physical representation to them that they have definitely lost the mandate of heaven when a emperor has lost the throne, because if they're ruling justly, it would never have happened. The Zhou dynasty from 1027 to 221 BCE, longest of the Chinese dynasties, tended to weaken over time. Rival warlords and governors created chaos and disorder. You have Kung Fu Tzu, and this is Confucius from 551 to 479 BCE. His philosophy is based on relationships, filial piety, and that's just one's loyalty to one's family. And also, Confucius' philosophies or religion, it's very important, their loyalty not only to their family, but also to their king or their prince or the emperor. There's proper rituals that they carry out through the time of the day. And then, again, this is known as Confucianism. Okay, now we have the rise of Taoism, sometimes spelled with a T, but it's pronounced Taoism, developed by Lao Tzu, 600 BCE. It means the path or the way. The focus is on nature and living in harmony with nature. Man is unhappy because he is unbalanced. So, the goal for man is to live in moderation and simplicity and have compassion. And they have belief in spirits and many gods as well. Then you have the Qin dynasty from 221 to 206 BCE. You have brutal warlords that unite much of northern China. Legalism is everywhere. Everything must be put into law under the power of the emperor. Qin, uh, you have the emperor his original name was Ying Cheng, and once China was united, he changed his name to Shi Huangdi. He's possibly crazy. He built both the Great Wall of China and a terracotta army which was protecting his mausoleum, or his burial chamber. He wanted to be immortal and burned books and banned any ideas other than legalism. And one of the reasons perhaps is because when his laborers were constructing the Great Wall, people who complained, or people working on it, would die of starvation or whatever, and people were forced to work on this thing, and a quarter of everyone who worked on the Great Wall died and was buried in the wall. And so any kind of record which showed his tyrannical rule was burned as well. It's probably to keep his reign or his rule from looking bad. So here are some of his accomplishments. You see the Great Wall on the left, his terracotta army on the right, which you see these magnificent stones that are crafted. Now each one of these terracotta warriors represents a man, a unique or individual. They're not just replicas of one terracotta. They're all their faces and features are unique to an individual in his army at the time, and basically these terracotta warriors are supposed to protect him in the afterlife. And this is probably one of the most remarkable architectural discoveries that happened in the 1970s. So this was very big in the modern world. Alright, now you have the Han Dynasty in 202 BC to 220 Common Era. They continued to unify China. They opened the Silk Road to the west, and Confucianism becomes the dominant Chinese philosophy. And here you see the example of the Silk Road, how it spans from China through Iran, through Iraq, Turkey. You have Afghanistan as well, and all the way up into Europe. And it's also important to note that it's this trade with China that the European countries are going to desire so much that it starts them on the path looking for a western passage to find China, because certain European countries had special rights to the Silk Road, and other Western powers or European countries were not allowed to trade on the Silk Road. So that's one extra reason for the search for a western passage to China, was to access this trade. Alright, Buddhism arrives in the 1st century. You have heated debates as to whether Buddhists should be allowed into China. It was granted in the 400 Common Era. It becomes a dominant religion during the 600 Common Eras. And you have the rise and fall of the Chinese dynasties. You have various families take control of China from 220 to 1211. The Mongols invade in 1211 to 1376. You have the Ming dynasty from the 1300s to 1644, vast builders. And you have the canals. Canals are constructed to connect rivers. You have the completion of the Great Wall, the 6,000 mile Great Wall of China. And then you have this huge military and naval army that was developed during the Ming Dynasty, and we're going to talk more about them in a moment. And then we also have the Forbidden City that was constructed. So here are some of the constructions of the Ming Dynasty. You see the Great Wall. Remember, it was its original nickname under construction from the Qin Dynasty under Shi Huangdi was the Long Graveyard, because 1/5 of China's labor force that constructed this thing, a quarter of them ended up dying, and when you died, they just built the wall over you. So that's one of the reasons for its unique nickname. Okay, here you have the Forbidden City, and you see this wonderful palace, and you also see a huge picture of Mao on the Forbidden Palace to signify the impact he has had and the influence he's had on China. Okay, now during the Ming Dynasty, there is this phenomenal construction of this navy that was set out under Admiral Hay to explore the Indian Pacific Oceans. He visited and traded with Africa, India, and there's some accounts he even traded with North America. So that leads us to a question. So why didn't China colonize America? So think about that, and we will have a discussion in class about this idea. So, now why is it the case that we don't speak Chinese? Well, after the death of Admiral Hay, money is diverted to other projects. The conquest of Vietnam draws off troops and funds. The court distrust of men like Hay. Admiral Hay is a Muslim. You have Mongol invasions in the north. And again, this was during the 1400s. These things happened. So there are some results. Chinese ships pulled out of water. They were allowed to rot. Actually, the emperor gave an order to have these ships burned. You have court records about Hay's expeditions are burned. All trade with the outside world was cut. Canals were allowed to be filled. And other Ming innovations also ended. End of the Ming Dynasty. Europeans arrived in 1513. You have the reign of Wan Li from 1572 to 1620. The emperor withdraws into studying Confucianism. He has earthquakes, plagues, crop failure, and economic collapse that occurred during his reign. Manchu soldiers revolted and overthrew the emperor. Now, if you recall, when those things happen, that means the mandate of heaven has passed from him to another ruler. Okay, so now you have the Manchu Qing dynasty from 1644 to 1912. They will rule China until overthrown in the 20th century. The Q order, you need to get a haircut on the pain of death, and so you see this image to the right is the haircut of the men in China are supposed to have. Writing is heavily censored, so during this time period you can write whatever you wanted to thought or express. Yeah, the reigns are marked with serious rebellions, growing outside control of China, and Europeans gain control of China during this period. In 1793, China refuses to buy European goods. They only want silver and gold. In 1838, we have the Opium War. In 1842, China surrenders. The Treaty of Nanking opens ports to Europeans. Now, if you recall, in my Korean lecture, that Korea saw the Opium Wars, and that's one reason why Korea wanted to maintain their isolationism. Now, in the Opium War, England had exported their opium crops or opium to China, and the emperor saw the harm it was doing to his people, the addiction, and so he tried to cut and seize all the opium that England was trading. And in the process, England's response was to send an expeditionary force to attack and forced the emperor to resume trade and to accept uh, the opium trade that was affecting his people. Yeah, Europeans divide China into mandate areas, and now in the 1898 to 1901 we have the Boxer Rebellion. Now this is a rebellion. The reason why they're called boxers is what the foreigners called them, was because they're great martial artists. They can fight, and they're athletic, and that's what they're known as. They wanted to fight against the foreigners. For example, you see this map on the right. In the north, you have the Russian sphere of influence. Just under them, you have Japan, and then in blue, south of Japan, you have the German sphere of influence, and then in yellow, you have the British sphere of influence. So you have all these foreigners who have control or some kind of say in China that's affecting them. So these boxers are trying to rid these foreigners and also Catholicism or Christianity from the land as well. There's massacres throughout China to stop the foreigners and also the spread of Christianity. So monarch is eventually overthrown in 1911. Yeah, the revolution is led by Dr. Sun Yat-sen. The Republic of China is declared. The republic begins to dissolve into warlordoms. Power passes to nationalist and communist rivals. And then that leads us to the next, the Chinese Civil War, which was fought between 1927 and the 1950s. It stops temporarily when World War II is starting. It's fought between General Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalists, and you have Mao Zedong leading the communists. Okay, China and World War II. China was invaded by Japan in 1937. There were major war crimes committed by the Japanese, especially a significant event called the Rape of Nanking. They're eventually liberated by the Russian forces in 1945, which were the Allied nation during the war, member of the United Nations Security Council. Now, you have the end of the Chinese Civil War. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists are defeated after World War II. They flee to Formosa, Taiwan, and China becomes a Communist People's Republic of China. There are fights in the Korean War against the United Nations and the United States. And here is the Chinese. They get involved in the Korean War. If you recall my Korean lecture, the North Koreans, under the direction of Stalin, invaded South Korea with a 90,000 force, and they pushed deep south, close to Busan. U.S. forces intervened by the orders of President Truman under the guidance of their General MacArthur, and they fought back the North Koreans. And then there was warnings from the Chinese that if the United States and United Nations would push past the 30th parallel, that China would get involved. And so eventually the UN forces and United States forces pushed the Yalu River, and then you have this huge insurgence of Chinese soldiers fighting, and this alarmed the United States, and they were pushed back 300 miles in a single month, back behind the 30th parallel. Okay, here you have some of the images of the Civil War. And here you have Mao, who causes a great change in China into the idea of communism. And here you have this funny picture in the lower right hand corner of Mao. And of course, you're not familiar with the expression ROFL, means rolling over on the floor laughing. Okay, now let's take a look at modern China. China remains divided between Taiwan and mainland China. Chinese Communist parties remain in control of China. Communism is abandoned in the 1990s, moving toward a market economy. And they have a major industrial and financial leader today. Owns over half of the United States debt, which gives China considerable power and say, probably over United States foreign relations. Okay, now, China is the world's most populous country. In the 1870s, there was a terrible drought. Crops failed and people began to starve. And 10 million people died as a result of starvation. But despite that time period, the population kept growing and kept expanding. In the 1980s, China became the first country to reach 1 billion people. Feeding a huge population is the challenge. So China worked on some policies to seize the population growth, and they came up with the policy of zero population growth. This happens when the number of births match the number of deaths each year. And China is working to achieve this population growth by implementing other policies. One of these policies is the one-child policy, and families receive benefits including cash for having just one child. Here you see this picture of a Chinese man and a Chinese woman. They're happy, they have a little girl, and so they're targeting people with this image. For one, typically males were desired more than females. That's one of the reasons why you see this picture of a little girl in this picture, because they want to try and change the culture of this expectation of only having one kid. When this policy first started under Mao Zedong, there was actually punishments for having more than one child.